My son expected an $800 PlayStation for Christmas. Instead, he opened a box that made him question everything he thought he knew about love. The empty box sat under our Christmas tree for 3 days, wrapped in shimmering gold paper with a perfect red bow. My son Jake had no idea that inside that beautiful package was absolutely nothing. But what he also didn't know was that this empty box would lead to the most powerful lesson about gratitude, family, and the true meaning of Christmas that either of us would ever experience. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. You see, this story isn't just about an empty box. It's about a father who watched his 16-year-old son transform from a grateful, kind-hearted kid into someone I barely recognized, someone who demanded the latest iPhone every 6 months, who threw tantrums when his friends got cars for their birthdays and he didn't, who rolled his eyes when I suggested we volunteer at the local food bank during the holidays. The final straw came 3 weeks before Christmas. Jake had been dropping hints about wanting the new PlayStation 5 Pro, the one that cost $800. Not hints, really, more like demands disguised as casual conversation. "Dad, everyone at school has the new PlayStation. Mine is so old and embarrassing. I can't even play the games everyone else is playing." I'd been working double shifts at the auto repair shop for months, trying to save up for Christmas presents while keeping up with our mortgage payments. Jake's mother and I had divorced 2 years earlier, and money had been tight ever since. But I wanted to give my son a good Christmas. I wanted to see that spark of joy in his eyes that I remembered from when he was little. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table paying bills, Jake walked in and dropped a printed list next to my coffee cup. "Christmas list," he announced with the casual confidence of someone who had never worried about money. At the top, in bold letters, was PlayStation 5 Pro, $800. Below that were 15 other items, each one more expensive than the last. Gaming headset, $200. New Nike shoes, $150. Apple Watch, $400. I stared at that list, adding up numbers in my head. The total came to over $2,000, more than I made in a month after taxes, more than we spent on groceries in 3 months. I looked up at my son, searching his face for any sign that he understood what he was asking for. "Jake," I said carefully, "this is quite a list. Do you really need all of these things?" His response hit me like a physical blow. "Dad, it's Christmas. This is what parents do. They buy their kids presents. If you can't afford it, maybe you should get a better job." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush us both. I watched my son walk away, his shoulders set with the kind of entitlement that made my chest ache with disappointment. This wasn't the boy I'd raised. This wasn't the kid who used to help me change oil in the garage, who used to save his allowance to buy his mom flowers on Mother's Day, who used to tell me I was his hero. Something had gone wrong somewhere along the way, and I realized with growing clarity that I was partly to blame. In my desperate attempt to make sure Jake didn't feel deprived after the divorce, I'd been saying yes to everything. New video games, expensive sneakers, restaurant meals when we should have been eating at home. I'd been so afraid of being the dad who couldn't provide that I'd forgotten to be the dad who taught values. That night, I called my own father. Dad was 82 years old, a man who'd raised 5 kids during the Great Depression with nothing but hard work and wisdom. I told him about Jake's list, about the demands, about the way my son had spoken to me. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Son," my father said in his weathered voice, "sometimes the best gift you can give a child is the gift of understanding what they already have. You're not raising a consumer, you're raising a man. And right now, you're failing at that job." The words stung because they were true. I was failing. I'd been so focused on giving Jake things that I'd forgotten to give him perspective. I'd been so worried about his happiness that I'd neglected his character. That's when the idea came to me. It was risky, maybe even cruel by some standards, but I knew it was necessary. I was going to teach my son a lesson about gratitude that he would never forget. And it was going to start with an empty box. The next morning, I drove to the mall and bought the most beautiful gift box I could find. Gold wrapping paper that caught the light like real metal. A red velvet bow that looked like it belonged on a luxury car commercial. I spent $40 on packaging alone, more than I usually spent on wrapping for all our presents combined. Then I went home and wrapped that empty box with more care than I'd ever wrapped any present in my life. For 3 weeks I watched Jake eye that golden package under our tree. He'd shake it gently when he thought I wasn't looking, trying to figure out what was inside. The box made no sound, which only seemed to increase his curiosity. He'd ask me hints about what it might be, and I'd just smile and tell him he'd have to wait until Christmas morning. During those 3 weeks, I also started implementing other changes. When Jake complained about having to do chores, I gave him extra ones. When he asked for money to go to the movies with friends, I told him he could earn it by helping Mrs. Patterson next door with her yard work. When he grumbled about our grocery store brand cereal instead of the name brand he preferred, I reminded him that food was a blessing that many families couldn't afford. Each reaction told me everything I needed to know about how far we'd drifted from the values I thought I'd instilled in him. Jake was genuinely shocked that he couldn't just ask for money and receive it. He was offended by the suggestion that he should work for the things he wanted. He acted like basic chores were some form of child abuse. But I also started sharing stories about my own childhood, about the Christmas when I got a single orange in my stocking and considered it the best present ever because oranges were expensive and rare in our house. About the summer, I worked 12 hours a day detasseling corn to buy my first bicycle. About the pride I felt when I earned my first paycheck and was able to contribute to our family's grocery budget. Jake listened to these stories with the polite disinterest of someone hearing about ancient history. It was clear that my experiences felt as foreign to him as tales from another planet. And maybe they were. Maybe I'd been so successful at protecting him from financial struggle that he had no framework for understanding sacrifice or appreciation. As Christmas morning approached, I found myself questioning whether I was doing the right thing. The empty box sat under our tree like a beautiful lie, and sometimes I wondered if I was being too harsh. Other times, I worried I wasn't being harsh enough, but every time Jake made another demand or showed another flash of entitlement, I reminded myself that this lesson was necessary. The night before Christmas, Jake and I sat in our living room watching old movies. It was a tradition we'd maintained even after the divorce, just the two of us sharing popcorn and hot chocolate while classic films played on our old television. But this year felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension I'd never felt before, a sense that something fundamental was about to change between us. "Dad," Jake said during a commercial break, pointing at the golden box under the tree. "That one's mine, right? The big one with the red bow." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a kid who had no idea that his world was about to shift dramatically. I saw someone who had never learned that love wasn't measured in dollars spent or gifts received. I saw a young man who desperately needed to understand that the most valuable things in life couldn't be wrapped in gold paper. "Yes," I said quietly, "that one's yours. And I promise you, it's a gift you'll never forget." Jake grinned with satisfaction, probably imagining the PlayStation or whatever expensive item he'd convinced himself was hidden inside that beautiful package. He had no way of knowing that inside that box was a lesson that would reshape his understanding of family, gratitude, and what it truly meant to receive a gift. Christmas morning was less than 8 hours away. In 8 hours, my son would unwrap an empty box and discover that sometimes the most powerful presents are the ones that teach us about everything we already have. In 8 hours, I would either help my boy become a better man, or I would damage our relationship in ways that might take years to repair. As we sat there in the glow of our Christmas tree lights, watching Jimmy Stewart learn about the value of a life well lived in It's a Wonderful Life, I couldn't help but think that we were both about to discover some truths about the wonderful life we'd been taking for granted. The empty box waited patiently under the tree, holding nothing and everything all at once. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of December day in Ohio that made our small living room feel like the coziest place on earth. I woke up before Jake, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the knot of anxiety sitting in my stomach like a lead weight. Today was the day I would either teach my son the most important lesson of his life or completely destroy the trust between us. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen, listening to the familiar sounds of our old house settling around me. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the living room, casting colored shadows on the walls. And there, positioned prominently under the lowest branch, sat that golden box with its perfect red bow. It looked so innocent, so beautiful, so full of promise. If only Jake knew what was really inside. I heard his footsteps on the stairs at exactly 7:30. Jake had always been an early riser on Christmas morning, even as a teenager. Some traditions, thankfully, hadn't changed. He appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing his favorite pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction, eyes bright with anticipation. "Morning, Dad!" His voice carried that special Christmas morning energy, the kind that made even sullen teenagers sound like excited children again. "Can we do presents now? I've been waiting forever." I smiled despite my nerves. "Forever, huh? You mean the 3 whole weeks since I put that box under the tree?" He grinned sheepishly, and for a moment I saw glimpses of the little boy who used to wake me up at 5 in the morning on Christmas, bouncing on my bed with pure joy. "Let me get my coffee, and then we'll see what Santa brought." I followed him into the living room, settling into my worn recliner, while Jake positioned himself cross-legged on the floor next to the tree. The morning light streaming through our windows made the gold wrapping paper shimmer like real treasure. There weren't many presents under the tree this year. Money had been too tight for the usual abundance. A few small gifts from relatives, some books I'd picked up at used bookstore sales, a new winter coat Jake actually needed, and that one beautiful empty box that seemed to draw all the light in the room. Jake reached for a small package first, something from his Aunt Sarah. Inside was a $20 gift card to his favorite pizza place. He thanked me to call and thank her, but I could see his attention already drifting to the golden box. It was like watching someone try to enjoy an appetizer when they could smell the main course cooking. The next few presents followed the same pattern. Polite appreciation, genuine gratitude for some items, but always that magnetic pull toward the mysterious golden package. I found myself stretching out the process, asking him to read cards aloud, encouraging him to really look at each gift before moving to the next one. Part of me was stalling, I'll admit. Part of me was dreading what came next. Finally, inevitably, only one present remained. Jake looked at me with barely contained excitement, his hands already reaching for the golden box before I gave him permission. "This is it, isn't it? This is the big one?" His voice was breathless with anticipation, and I felt my heart clench with a mixture of love and apprehension. "Go ahead, son. Open it up." The words came out steadier than I felt. Jake's fingers found the edge of the wrapping paper, and he began to tear with the careful enthusiasm of someone who knew this moment mattered. The gold paper fell away in elegant strips, revealing the pristine white gift box underneath. He lifted the lid with ceremonial care, his face lit up with expectation. And then, nothing. The expression on his face shifted through a series of emotions so quickly I could barely track them. Confusion first, as his brain tried to process what his eyes were seeing. Then disbelief, as he reached into the empty box as if his vision might be playing tricks on him. His hands moved around the hollow interior, searching for something, anything that might explain this impossible situation. "Dad?" His voice was small, uncertain, nothing like the confident teenager who'd handed me that expensive Christmas list 3 weeks ago. "Dad, there's nothing in here. This box is empty." He looked up at me with eyes that held the first glimmer of genuine vulnerability I'd seen from him in months. "I know, son." I kept my voice gentle but firm. "The box is empty." Jake stared at me, then back at the box, then at me again. His face was cycling through emotions like a slot machine landing on different combinations. Confusion, hurt, anger, betrayal, all flickering across his features in rapid succession. "I don't understand." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and I heard echoes of the little boy he used to be. "Is this some kind of joke? Are you punishing me for something? Where's my real present?" The questions came faster now, tinged with desperation. "Did you forget to put something in here? Is this a mistake?" I leaned forward in my chair, meeting his eyes directly. "Jake, this isn't a mistake. This isn't punishment. This is exactly the gift I intended to give you." He shook his head, still clutching the empty box like it might suddenly produce the PlayStation he'd been dreaming about. "That doesn't make sense, Dad. You can't give someone nothing for Christmas. That's not how presents work." His voice was rising now, anger beginning to overtake confusion. This is cruel. This is just mean. I felt my throat tighten, but I pressed on. Son, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. That box isn't empty. It's full of something more valuable than any PlayStation or iPhone or expensive gadget you could ever want. Jake's eyes flashed with teenage indignation. What are you talking about? There's literally nothing in here. It's an empty box, Dad. Empty. I stood up slowly, moving to sit on the floor across from him. We were eye level now, father and son, separated by 3 feet of carpet and years of accumulated misunderstanding. Jake, when's the last time you said thank you? Really said thank you and meant it? When's the last time you appreciated something you already had instead of demanding something new? His mouth opened as if to answer, then closed again. I could see him thinking, searching through recent memories for examples that would prove me wrong. The silence stretched between us, heavy with realization. When's the last time you helped someone without being asked? When's the last time you thought about how hard I work to keep this roof over our heads, to put food on our table, to make sure you have clothes and books and opportunities? Jake's face was flushing now, but I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or anger. Dad, what does this have to do with Christmas presents? I buy you things because I love you, son. But somewhere along the way, you started thinking that love was supposed to come with a price tag. You started measuring my affection by how much money I spent on you. And I let that happen because I was scared of disappointing you. I reached over and touched the edge of the empty box, my fingers tracing the smooth cardboard. This box represents something I should have given you a long time ago. The understanding that you already have everything you need, that you're surrounded by blessings you've forgotten how to see, that the most important gifts in life can't be bought in any store. Jake's grip on the box tightened, his knuckles white against the cardboard. But I wanted the PlayStation, Dad. You knew I wanted it. I've been talking about it for months. All my friends have one. I feel stupid and left out and embarrassed, and now I have to go back to school and tell everyone that my dad gave me an empty box for Christmas. The pain in his voice nearly broke my resolve, but I forced myself to continue. Jake, do you remember when you were 8 years old and we couldn't afford to go to Disney World like the Henderson family? Do you remember what we did instead? He shook his head, clearly not seeing the connection between past disappointments and present lessons. We went camping at Lake Erie, just you and me, sleeping in that old tent that leaked when it rained. We cooked hot dogs over the campfire and told ghost stories and watched the stars. And when we got home, you told everyone it was the best vacation ever. You said you felt sorry for kids who had to go to crowded theme parks when they could have adventures in nature instead. I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, a glimpse of that 8-year-old boy who had found magic in simple pleasures. That little boy understood something that this teenager had forgotten. He knew that the best gifts weren't things you could unwrap. They were moments you shared, feelings you experienced, love you gave and received. The room fell quiet, except for the gentle hum of our old heater and the distant sound of church bells ringing across the neighborhood. Other families were probably gathered around their trees right now, unwrapping expensive presents and adding to the mountain of stuff that would be forgotten by New Year's Day. But here, in our modest living room, something different was happening. Something that couldn't be bought or wrapped or returned to the store if it didn't fit. Jake was still holding that empty box, but I could see something shifting in his expression. The anger was fading, replaced by something deeper and more complicated. Understanding, maybe. Or at least the beginning of understanding. Dad, I still don't get it. His voice was quieter now, less defiant, but still confused. You're saying this empty box is supposed to teach me something, but I don't understand what. I just feel embarrassed and hurt, and like you don't care about what I want. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper I'd been carrying for weeks. Jake, I want you to look at something. I unfolded the paper carefully, revealing a list written in my own handwriting. It wasn't his Christmas wish list. It was something else entirely. What is that? He leaned forward, curiosity overriding his hurt feelings for a moment. This is a list of everything you've received this year, not just presents, but everything. I started reading aloud, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. January, new winter boots when yours wore out, $60. February, emergency money for the school ski trip when you decided last minute you wanted to go, $80. March, Replacement phone when you dropped yours in the pool, $300. Jake's eyes widened as I continued down the list. The numbers added up quickly. Too quickly. School clothes in August, $400. Homecoming expenses in October, $200. Video games throughout the year, another $300. The list went on for 2 full pages, documenting every purchase, every expense, every time I'd opened my wallet because my son asked. By the time I finished reading, the silence in the room felt heavy enough to suffocate us both. Jake stared at the paper like it contained evidence of some crime he didn't remember committing. "Dad, I didn't know you were keeping track of all that." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask you to spend all that money." "You're right," I said, folding the paper back up. "You didn't ask. You demanded. There's a difference. When you ask for something, you're prepared to accept no for an answer. When you demand something, you expect to get it regardless of whether the other person can afford it or wants to give it." I stood up and walked to our mantel, where a collection of framed photos documented Jake's childhood. There he was at age 3, grinning toothlessly while hugging a stuffed animal that had cost me $5 at a garage sale. Age 6, proudly displaying a birthday cake I'd made from a box mix because we couldn't afford a bakery cake. Age 9, wearing a Halloween costume I'd sewn myself because store-bought costumes were too expensive that year. In every single photo, he looked genuinely, radiantly happy. Not because of what he had, but because of who he was with. Because he felt loved and secure and celebrated. Because back then, he understood something that teenage Jake had forgotten. "Look at these pictures, son," I gestured toward the mantel. "In how many of them are you holding expensive gifts? How many show you with the latest gadgets or designer clothes or things that cost hundreds of dollars?" Jake stood up slowly, still clutching the empty box, and moved to examine the photos. I watched his face as he studied image after image of his younger self. Happy kid, modest circumstances, genuine joy radiating from every picture. "Not many," he admitted quietly. "Most of them are just us together, doing stuff, having fun." "Exactly." I moved to stand beside him, both of us looking at the visual history of his childhood. "Jake, the happiest kid in these photos is also the kid who had the least stuff, the kid who got excited about a new library book or a trip to the ice cream shop, or an afternoon spent building blanket forts in the living room." He was quiet for a long moment, processing this observation. "When did that change, Dad? When did I start caring more about things than about time with you?" "I think it started gradually after the divorce. I wrapped my arm around his shoulder, surprised when he didn't pull away. I was so worried about you feeling deprived, so afraid you'd think I was a failure as a father because I couldn't give you everything your friends had. So I started saying yes to things I should have said no to. I started buying your happiness instead of building it." Jake leaned into me slightly, and I felt something ease in my chest. We stood there together, father and son, surrounded by evidence of simpler times when love didn't come with a price tag. "I've been a spoiled brat, haven't I?" The words came out muffled against my shoulder, tinged with the kind of shame that comes with genuine self-recognition. "I've been treating you like an ATM instead of like my dad." "You've been acting spoiled," I corrected gently. "But that's different from being spoiled. Acting spoiled is a choice. Being spoiled is a character trait. You can change the way you act. I should have helped you make that change sooner instead of enabling behavior that was turning you into someone neither of us liked very much." He pulled back to look at me, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't realize how much money you've been spending on me, or how much pressure I've been putting on you. I just wanted to fit in with my friends, and I thought having the right stuff would make that happen." I reached out and wiped away the tear that had escaped down his cheek. "Jake, I need you to understand something important. You don't need expensive things to fit in with real friends, and if someone only wants to be your friend because of what you own, then they're not actually your friend at all. But what if they think I'm poor? What if they think less of me because I don't have what they have? Then you'll discover who your real friends are." I guided him back to the couch, where we sat facing each other with the empty box between us. "Son, I want to tell you about your grandfather, my dad, the one who raised 5 kids during the Depression." Jake nodded, settling in to listen. He'd heard stories about his grandfather before, but never in this context. When I was your age, I was embarrassed by everything about our family. We wore secondhand clothes, drove an old truck that broke down constantly, lived in a house that needed repairs we couldn't afford. I was convinced that everyone at school looked down on us because we didn't have money. What changed your mind? One day I complained to your grandfather about being embarrassed by our circumstances, and he sat me down and told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Son, poor is a temporary condition, but ashamed is a permanent character flaw. Don't let temporary circumstances turn you into someone permanently unlikable." Jake absorbed this wisdom quietly, his fingers tracing the edges of the empty box. What did he mean? He meant that having less money doesn't make you less valuable as a person. But being ashamed of your circumstances or treating other people badly because you want what they have, that does make you less valuable. That changes who you are on the inside, and those changes can last a lifetime if you let them. I reached over and tapped the empty box. That's what this gift is really about, Jake. It's about helping you see that you already have everything that matters. You have a father who loves you. You have a home, food, clothes, education, opportunities. You have friends who care about you for who you are, not what you own. You have talents and interests and a future full of possibilities. But what about the PlayStation? He asked, though his voice lacked the demanding edge it had carried for weeks. What about all the things on my list? What about them? I challenged gently. Will owning a PlayStation make you a better person? Will having expensive sneakers make you a better friend? Will getting the latest iPhone make you happier 6 months from now? Or will you just be wanting the next new thing? Jake considered this seriously, his teenage brain working through concepts that most adults struggle with. Probably just wanting the next thing, he admitted. That's kind of what's been happening, isn't it? Every time I get something new, I'm happy for a little while, and then I start wanting something else. Exactly. I smiled, proud of his growing understanding. That's called the hedonic treadmill. You keep running toward happiness through material possessions, but the happiness never lasts because you're always chasing the next purchase. It's exhausting, and it never leads to real satisfaction. So what does lead to real satisfaction? Great question. I stood up and walked to our bookshelf, pulling out a photo album I hadn't looked at in years. Come here, I want to show you something. Jake joined me on the couch as I opened the album to a specific page. The photo showed him at age 10, covered in mud from head to toe, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Behind him was our backyard vegetable garden, freshly planted. Do you remember this day? He studied the photo, and slowly his face lit up with recognition. We planted the garden together. It took us all day because I kept getting distracted and wanting to play with the hose instead of actually watering the plants. Right. And do you remember how you felt that evening when we finished? Proud. Really proud. Like we'd accomplished something important together. He paused, understanding dawning in his expression, and tired. But the good kind of tired. That's what real satisfaction feels like, Jake. It comes from working for something, from contributing to something bigger than yourself, from spending time with people you love, doing things that matter. It doesn't come from unwrapping packages or unboxing gadgets or showing off purchases to your friends. I turned to another page in the album, this one showing Jake at age 12, teaching his younger cousin how to ride a bike. In the photo, both kids were laughing, Jake's face glowing with the pride of being helpful and needed. What about this one? Do you remember how you felt this day? Important. Like I was making a difference. Like someone needed me to help them learn something new. His voice grew thoughtful. I felt useful, I guess. Like I had something valuable to offer that wasn't about money or things I owned. Those feelings, that sense of purpose and contribution and meaningful connection, that's what the empty box represents, son. It represents all the gifts you already have that don't cost anything but are worth everything. Jake closed the photo album gently, his hands lingering on the cover. Dad, I think I'm starting to understand. But I still feel disappointed about Christmas morning. Is that wrong? Not wrong at all. I pulled him closer, wrapping him in a hug that felt different from the awkward, obligatory embraces we'd shared recently. This one felt genuine, connected, like we were actually seeing each other clearly for the first time in months. Disappointment is a natural emotion, but what matters is what you do with that disappointment. Do you let it turn into resentment and entitlement, Or do you use it as an opportunity to examine what you really need versus what you think you want? He was quiet for a long moment, processing everything we'd discussed. The empty box sat forgotten on the coffee table, no longer the symbol of disappointment it had been an hour ago. Now it looked different somehow, less like a cruel trick and more like what it actually was, a container for something invisible but infinitely valuable. "Dad, can I tell you something?" His voice was hesitant, vulnerable in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Always, son, you can tell me anything. I've been feeling really lonely lately. Even when I'm with my friends, even when I have new stuff to show off, I still feel empty inside. Like nothing I get or do actually makes me feel better about myself." The honesty in his admission took my breath away. This was the breakthrough I'd been hoping for, the moment when my son stopped defending his behavior and started examining it honestly. "That emptiness you're feeling, Jake, that's what happens when we try to fill emotional needs with material things. It's like trying to cure hunger by looking at pictures of food. No matter how many pictures you look at, you're still going to be hungry, because you're not actually feeding yourself what you need." "What do I actually need then?" Jake's question hung in the air between us, raw and honest in a way that reminded me of the little boy who used to ask me why the sky was blue and whether dinosaurs had feelings. "You need connection, son. Real connection with people who matter to you. You need purpose, something that makes you feel useful and important beyond just consuming things. You need growth, the satisfaction that comes from learning and improving and becoming better than you were yesterday." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our neighborhood where other families were probably dealing with their own Christmas morning dynamics. Some kids were undoubtedly squealing with delight over expensive gifts. Others were learning hard lessons about money and priorities. But all of them were navigating the complex relationship between love and material things that defines so much of modern family life. "Jake, do you want to know what the best Christmas gift I ever received was?" He nodded, settling back into the couch with genuine curiosity. "I was 15 years old, about your age. We were even poorer than usual that year because your grandfather had been laid off from the factory for 3 months. What did you get?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing." I turned back to face him, watching his expression shift from confusion to interest. Christmas morning came, and there were no presents under our tree. Not one. Your grandfather gathered all us kids in the living room and told us he had something more valuable than toys or clothes or anything we could buy in a store. Jake leaned forward, drawn into the story despite himself. "What was it?" "He told us we were going to spend the entire day helping Mrs. Rodriguez next door. She was an elderly widow whose husband had died that fall, and she didn't have any family nearby. We were going to clean her house, cook her dinner, decorate her tree, and make sure she wasn't alone on Christmas." "It doesn't sound like fun for a 15-year-old. I laughed, remembering my own initial reaction. "You're right. I was furious. I complained and sulked and made everyone miserable for the first hour. But then something changed. Mrs. Rodriguez started telling us stories about her childhood in Mexico, about the traditions her family had celebrated, about how lonely she'd been since her husband passed away." Jake was listening intently now, his earlier disappointment about the PlayStation seeming to fade as he got caught up in the story. By the end of the day, I felt different than I'd ever felt before. Not because I'd gotten something, but because I'd given something. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying when we left, but they were happy tears. She kept saying we'd given her the best Christmas she'd had in years. And you know what, Jake? She'd given us something too. "What?" "The understanding that we had enough. More than enough. We had each other, we had health, we had the ability to make someone else's day better just by showing up. That empty feeling I'd been carrying around, the one that made me want things we couldn't afford, it was gone. Completely gone." Jake was quiet for several minutes, processing this story and its implications. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head as he connected the dots between his grandfather's lesson and the empty box sitting on our coffee table. "Dad, is that why you gave me this box? To help me feel that same thing?" "Partly. But also because I realized I'd been failing you as a father. Not because I couldn't buy you expensive gifts, but because I'd stopped teaching you the values that would actually make you happy. I'd gotten so caught up in trying to give you things that I forgot to give you perspective. I sat back down beside him, picking up the empty box and turning it over in my hands. This box represents a choice, Jake. You can see it as evidence that your father doesn't love you enough to buy you what you want, or you can see it as proof that your father loves you enough to teach you what you need. He reached out and took the box from me, holding it carefully like it contained something precious and fragile. I think I'm starting to see it the second way, but it's hard. Part of me still feels disappointed and embarrassed. That's normal. Change is hard, especially when it means admitting that the way you've been thinking about things might have been wrong. But Jake, I need you to know that this isn't just about Christmas presents or money or material things. This is about who you want to become as a person. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken a few weeks earlier without him knowing. It was a picture of him helping our elderly neighbor Mr. Chen carry groceries up his front steps. Jake's face in the photo showed genuine concern and kindness, the expression of someone who cared more about helping than about being seen helping. Look at your face in this picture. Really look at it. You weren't performing for anyone. You weren't expecting anything in return. You were just being a good person, because that's who you are deep down. That's the Jake I want to help you remember how to be. He studied the photo for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or remembrance of who he used to be before entitlement and peer pressure had clouded his natural compassion. I'd forgotten about that day. Mr. Chen looked so tired and his groceries were so heavy, it felt good to help him. That feeling, that satisfaction from helping someone who needed it, that's worth more than any PlayStation or iPhone or expensive gadget you could ever own. That feeling comes from character, not from consumption. And character is the only gift that actually gets more valuable over time. Jake set the box down carefully on the coffee table and turned to face me fully. Dad, I owe you an apology. Not just for this morning, but for the way I've been acting for months, maybe years. I've been selfish and demanding and ungrateful, and I turned you into someone who was afraid to disappoint me instead of someone who was proud to teach me. The maturity in his words caught me off guard. This was the breakthrough I'd been hoping for, but it was happening faster and more completely than I'd dared to expect. I accept your apology, son, but I owe you one too. I should have had this conversation with you a long time ago, before things got this bad. I should have been braver about saying no to you when saying no was what you needed to hear. We sat together in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us processing the weight of everything that had been said. Outside, I could hear children playing in the snow, their laughter mixing with the sound of church bells and distant Christmas music. Normal sounds of a normal Christmas morning, but nothing about this morning felt normal anymore. Dad, what happens now? Jake's question was practical, but also deeper than that. He was asking about our relationship, about his behavior, about the kind of person he wanted to become going forward. Now we start over. We rebuild our relationship on a foundation of respect instead of transactions. We focus on experiences instead of acquisitions. We measure our success by how much we contribute to other people's lives instead of how much stuff we accumulate for ourselves. I stood up and walked to our hall closet, pulling out 2 winter coats and a pair of gloves. What are you doing? Getting ready to go out. There's something I want us to do together. Something that will help you understand what real Christmas joy feels like. Jake looked puzzled but curious. Where are we going? Downtown to the homeless shelter. They serve Christmas dinner every year, and they can always use extra volunteers. I called them yesterday and told them we might stop by. His face lit up with something I hadn't seen in months. Genuine enthusiasm that wasn't connected to getting something for himself. Really? We can do that? If you want to. But I should warn you, it's not glamorous work. We'll probably be washing dishes, serving food, cleaning tables. Nothing that will impress your friends or give you bragging rights. Jake was already reaching for his coat. Dad, I don't care about impressing my friends anymore. At least not that way. I want to do something that matters. I want to feel useful again. As we bundled up for the cold December morning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride in my son that had nothing to do with his achievements or possessions, and everything to do with his character. The empty box had done its job, creating space for him to rediscover the parts of himself that mattered most. Before we left, Jake picked up the golden box one more time, turning it over in his hands thoughtfully. "You know what, Dad? This really is the best Christmas present you could have given me. Not because it's empty, but because it helped me see how full my life already is." I wrapped my arm around his shoulder as we headed toward the door. "That's the thing about gratitude, son. Once you start seeing it, you realize it's everywhere. You just have to know how to look." The cold air hit our faces as we stepped outside, but neither of us minded. We had somewhere important to be, something meaningful to do, and each other to share it with. The empty box had taught us that sometimes the most powerful gifts are the ones that help us see everything we already have. As we drove toward downtown, Jake was quiet but not sullen, thoughtful instead of demanding, present instead of distracted. The teenager sitting next to me looked the same as the one who'd unwrapped that empty box 2 hours earlier, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd remembered who he was beneath all the wanting and demanding and consuming. And I'd remembered who I was too. Not just a provider of things, but a teacher of values. Not just someone who worked to afford my son's desires, but someone who helped shape his character. The empty box had been a gift to both of us, creating space for the relationship we'd lost somewhere along the way. The homeless shelter was bustling with activity when we arrived, volunteers and staff preparing to serve hundreds of people who had nowhere else to go on Christmas morning. Jake took it all in with wide eyes, seeing perhaps for the first time what real need looked like compared to his own manufactured sense of deprivation. We spent the next 4 hours serving food, washing dishes, and listening to stories from people whose gratitude for a simple meal made Jake's complaints about brand-name cereals seem impossibly petty. I watched him interact with children who were thrilled to receive donated toys that were neither new nor expensive, who found joy in coloring books and small stuffed animals that cost less than Jake usually spent on lunch. By the time we drove home that afternoon, something had changed in both of us. The car felt different. Our conversation felt different. Even the silence felt different. It was comfortable instead of tense, connected instead of separated by unspoken resentments and unmet expectations. That evening, as we sat down to our own simple Christmas dinner, Jake looked around our modest dining room with new eyes. Instead of seeing what we didn't have, he was seeing what we did have. Instead of focusing on empty spaces under the tree, he was noticing the fullness of our shared experience. The empty box sat on our mantel now, transformed from a symbol of disappointment into a reminder of discovery. Every time Jake looked at it in the weeks and months that followed, it would remind him of the day he learned that the most valuable gifts couldn't be wrapped, bought, or returned to the store if they didn't fit perfectly. And every time I looked at it, I would remember the day I finally gave my son what he actually needed instead of what he thought he wanted. The day an empty box taught us both that we already had everything that mattered. That empty box became our family's most treasured possession, though it never held anything you could touch or measure. In the months that followed that Christmas morning, Jake would often pick it up and turn it over in his hands, not searching for something hidden inside anymore, but remembering the moment everything changed for both of us. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect. Old habits die hard, especially for teenagers navigating the complex social pressures of high school. There were still moments when Jake would see something his friends had and feel that familiar pang of wanting. But now, instead of demanding or sulking, he would pause and ask himself the questions we'd discovered together. Do I need this? Or do I just want it? Will having this make me a better person? What am I trying to fill by acquiring this thing? More importantly, he started finding satisfaction in experiences rather than possessions. The volunteering at the homeless shelter became a monthly tradition for us. Jake began tutoring younger kids at school, not because it looked good on college applications, but because he remembered how it felt to be needed and useful. He started a small business, helping elderly neighbors with yard work and simple home repairs, earning money through service rather than simply asking for handouts. The changes in our relationship were even more profound than the changes in his character. We began having conversations instead of negotiations. Instead of him presenting me with lists of things he wanted, we talked about dreams he had, challenges he was facing, ideas he was exploring. I learned about his thoughts on everything from environmental conservation to social justice to the books he was reading in English class. For my part, I stopped being afraid to say no when no was the right answer. I stopped trying to buy his affection or prove my love through purchases. Instead, I proved it through presence, through attention, through the kind of guidance that actually helps a young person grow into someone they can be proud of becoming. The empty box also taught me something crucial about parenting that I wish I'd understood years earlier. Love isn't about giving your children everything they ask for. Real love sometimes means disappointing them in the short term to help them become people who won't disappoint themselves in the long term. Real love means teaching them to find joy in contribution rather than consumption, satisfaction in character rather than possessions. Jake's friends noticed the change too, though they didn't always understand it. Some were puzzled when he stopped pushing for the latest gadgets or designer clothes. Others were inspired by his new focus on experiences and relationships over material things. A few of his closest friends even started joining us at the homeless shelter, discovering for themselves the deep satisfaction that comes from serving others. The most powerful moment came about 6 months after that Christmas morning. Jake was accepted to his first-choice college, and his friends were all talking about the expensive gifts they expected to receive for graduation. Jake came to me not with a list of demands, but with a proposal. "Dad," he said, settling into what had become his favorite spot on our couch, "I've been thinking about graduation, and I have an idea. Instead of spending money on expensive gifts for me, what if we used that money to do something that would help other people?" I looked at my son, this young man who had transformed so completely from the entitled teenager of the previous year, and felt my chest swell with a pride that had nothing to do with his academic achievements or college acceptance and everything to do with who he was becoming as a human being. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, though I was prepared to support whatever he suggested. "Remember Mrs. Rodriguez, the one from Grandpa's story? There's a woman like that in our neighborhood now, Mrs. Patterson down the street. Her husband died last month, and she's struggling to maintain their house and yard. What if we used graduation gift money to hire a landscaping company to fix up her yard for the summer? And maybe we could organize the neighbors to help with other repairs?" The parallel to my father's Christmas lesson wasn't lost on me. Here was my son, without any prompting from me, choosing service over self-interest, choosing to give rather than receive, choosing to measure his graduation not by what he accumulated, but by what he contributed. We spent Jake's graduation day not at expensive restaurants or shopping for costly gifts, but organizing a neighborhood effort to help Mrs. Patterson. Jake coordinated volunteers, I contributed my handyman skills, and together we transformed both her property and her spirits. The joy on her face when she saw her restored garden was worth more than any graduation present we could have purchased. That evening, as we sat on our back porch reflecting on the day, Jake picked up the empty box from where it had found a permanent home on our outdoor table. "You know what's funny, Dad?" he said, holding it up to catch the last rays of the setting sun. "This box isn't empty anymore." I looked at him curiously, wondering what he meant. "It's full of all the best parts of this past year. Every volunteer shift, every conversation we've had, every time I chose to help instead of asking for help, every moment I felt grateful instead of entitled. All of that is in here now." He set the box down gently, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. In that moment, I realized that the empty box had become something neither of us had expected when I first wrapped it in gold paper. It had become a container for our transformation, a symbol of the family we'd chosen to become, rather than the family we'd accidentally been becoming. The empty box taught us both that the most meaningful gifts are often invisible, that the most valuable possessions are the ones you can't hold in your hands, and that the richest people are those who have learned to see abundance in what they already have rather than scarcity in what they lack. As I write this story now, years later, that golden box still sits on our mantle. Jake is in college now, studying social work because he wants to spend his career helping people rather than accumulating wealth. He calls every week, and our conversations are filled with his excitement about his studies, his volunteer work, his plans to make a positive difference in the world. And every Christmas morning, we still volunteer at the homeless shelter together. It's become our most cherished family tradition, the gift we give ourselves by giving to others. Well, the empty box comes with us each year, a reminder of the Christmas morning when we both learned that the best presents are the ones that help us become better people. If you're a parent reading this, wondering whether you're raising children or consumers, whether you're teaching gratitude or entitlement, I encourage you to consider the power of an empty box, not necessarily a literal empty box, though that certainly worked for us, but the metaphorical empty box of creating space for your children to discover what they truly need, rather than simply giving them what they think they want. The hardest part of parenting isn't providing for your children's physical needs. It's helping them develop the character and values that will serve them long after they have outgrown their childhood bedrooms and moved into lives of their own. Sometimes that means disappointing them in small ways to prevent them from disappointing themselves in big ways later on. The empty box taught Jake that happiness doesn't come from getting what you want, but from wanting what you have. It taught him that satisfaction doesn't come from accumulating possessions, but from contributing to purposes larger than himself. It taught him that love isn't measured in dollars spent, but in attention given and wisdom shared. And it taught me that being a father means more than being a provider. It means being a guide, a teacher, a model of the values you want your children to embrace. It means having the courage to give them what they need, even when it's not what they want, especially when it's not what they want. That Christmas morning, when Jake unwrapped an empty box, we both discovered that sometimes the most powerful gifts are the ones that force us to look inward rather than outward, that help us recognize abundance rather than scarcity, that teach us to give rather than receive. The empty box now sits in Jake's apartment, a reminder of the Christmas that changed everything for our family. And someday, when he has children of his own, I suspect he'll understand the true value of gifts that can't be bought, wrapped, or returned to the store when they don't fit quite right. Because the best presents aren't the ones that satisfy our wants, but the ones that help us discover everything we already have. And sometimes, those gifts come wrapped in beautiful paper and tied with perfect bows, containing absolutely nothing except the opportunity to see our lives, our relationships, and ourselves with completely new eyes. If you like this story, please subscribe to the channel and share your own experiences with teaching gratitude and values to the young people in your life. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come in the most unexpected packages, and I'd love to hear about the empty boxes that have transformed your family's understanding of what truly matters.